What is up, you guys? Wow, it's been a minute. I'm really sorry. Every time I kind of take a break from this, I'm going to excessively apologize. Yeah, it's been crazy. I have so many life updates for you guys. So be a little patient here. I did graduate. Woohoo! Such a wonderful time, a wonderful celebration. I ended the race well. I graduated summa cum laude, which is like the highest distinction for honors. You have to have like a 3.85 GPA or higher. And so I graduated with honors. I had some family come out. We celebrated and we just enjoyed each other's company, family and friends, and it's all over now. Well, not really. So, most of you know I have been talking about that I want to be a mental health counselor, and I kind of let you know my journey of the process of applying for school and having my interview, things like that. Well, and I have some news for you. I got accepted! Woohoo! Yeah, I start in the fall. I am taking the full summer off. I am going to enjoy my time. Yeah, so since graduation, I have just been kind of unwinding and enjoying some time off. Hence why I'm getting back into this. I'm going to try to dedicate more and more time to develop this and give you guys more content. So I have been reading this book. So this book is called The Minds of Mass Killers: Understanding and Interrupting the Pathway to Violence by Dr. P. Shavaun Scott. I actually learned about this book because Dr. Shavaun Scott's agent reached out to me a while ago and we scheduled to have her on the show. So that's who my guest is for today. My very first guest. I'm super excited. I will post the video on an additional YouTube, so if anyone wants to watch us actually talking, if you want to actually see our faces. So Dr. Scott is a mental health therapist, and she has 30 years of research experience in criminal psychology. Her book is more about the realities of mass killings, particularly mass shootings. We kind of scratched the surface with her book, and we are going to go more in detail in it throughout the podcast, throughout some episodes. And I do plan on having her back on the show. So you guys check out her book, The Minds of Mass Killers by Dr. P. Shavaun Scott. It is super relevant to what is going on right now, and she does currently practice in California and Oregon, and she is just so amazing. She's got so much knowledge about criminology, neuroscience, and developmental and social psychology, and the whole point of her book pretty much makes the case that we are all capable of creating a safer society. In our interview, we dived into quite a few issues that are points of discussion that your everyday citizens are having about mass shootings. And we also just talk about making for a kinder society, and that we can all be a part of the change. And there is a side story of intervention that I do share that happened at my high school years after I left. I also want to say that our hearts, our thoughts, and our prayers do go out to the families in New York and in Texas. I do want to say I do have friends that live in the town in Texas where this happened. And luckily, I do know that they are safe and that their kids go to a different school, but it still hits close to home. So I definitely have them in my thoughts and everyone else that is involved and that is affected by this. It's very traumatic. It's very devastating. And with that, I'm your host, Katie Gonzalez, and you're listening to What the Psychology. Okay. Well, hi. I'm so excited for this.
Yeah, there's a lot of adrenaline going today.
I know, and it's crazy because we've had this plan for a few months now, and then of course recent events happen, and it's very unfortunate, but it's a very relevant topic. And I actually have friends that live in the town where this
Wow.
happened. Luckily, their kids go to a different school, but it's still like just very shaken with it being so
Yeah.
close to home for them.
Yeah. I think the whole country is in a state of trauma because when we've had the incident in the Bronx and then it went to Buffalo, and I was talking with people after the Buffalo event that we're going to have to really be careful in the next 2 weeks because there tends to be a big contagion effect. And it has just been boom, boom, boom since then. And then the news is also flooding with plots that have been interrupted in the last few days.
Right.
And it's really hitting people. I have been flooded today with not only requests for emergency sessions from my clients who are feeling the stress, but also my Facebook Messenger has been blowing up with people wanting to talk about it. And yeah, yeah, it's disturbing in the deepest way.
Yeah, and I think my husband told me today, I need to check. Yeah, he told me this morning, hey, there was a shooting in Nashville, which is where I'm from originally. And I'm like, what? Like, and I don't know if it was like an actual shooting or if it was like I don't know. I'm kind of looking at the news because I haven't been able to really look into it, but I'm like, it's crazy. I'm
Yeah,
like,
I've
no,
seen headlines about at two or three that would have been significant but were interrupted. So one of them may have been Nashville. I'm really not sure. I can't keep track. And that's
yeah,
one of the things that I try to do is just track what's happening and where it's happening and track the patterns. And it's just frustrating and horrible. There have been so many, I can't even keep up with it.
it's crazy.
Yeah, tracking it would just have to be my full-time job, I think, if I were going to be successful at that.
Right. You wouldn't really get much of anything else done.
No, I couldn't have a clinical practice if I just focused on it all the time.
Right. Okay, well, tell us a little bit more about yourself. Of course, I'm recording this now, and I think usually my stuff is audio, but for YouTube, I'll probably post like the full video, and then with the podcast, I'll edit and whatnot.
Sure.
But for the listeners, I know I've read up on you, and I'm so inspired by you because I'm kind of on that path. I just graduated college with my bachelor's in like multidisciplinary, but my concentration was um, what is it? I just blanked. Behavioral health.
Gotcha.
And I've already been accepted for the fall into clinical mental health counseling for my master's.
Oh, wonderful. Well,
Yeah, so I'm like,
congratulations.
yeah, and I haven't done an episode in a while because finals and everything. And so my viewers know that that was kind of my path, but now I get to tell them, oh, I made it. Like I got in. So I pretty much fell in love with psychology my I guess my first semester or so because I was in the military prior. I did my 6 years and my job was like human resources. So completely different. When I was separating, I did like an internship. I did not like it. I'm like, this is so different on the outside. I can't do this. Like, I mean, I'm not gonna nag on HR, but where I did my internship, it was just like customer service wasn't a priority, and they were very departmentalized instead of being more everyone kind of knows a little bit of everything. And the military, it's like you're expected to know everything, so it's just completely different. And then COVID hit. I couldn't get a job, and my husband's like, well, go to school. You've been saying you wanted to go to school. And so I did. First, I was going to go like business admin, or I guess more like medical administration. And I took like a healthcare systems class. And it was so interesting, but it bored me to death. I had a great professor and everything. I'm just like, this ain't it. And then I took a intro to psych class that next semester, and I was like, okay, this is it. I fell in love with psychology, and I'm like, this is what I want to do. And And I've always been very empathetic to people, and always am the one that people come to and with their problems. And I'm always like non-biased. And I've had friends that are like, two people are in a conflict. I'm like, well, I'm still both of your friends. And some don't like that, but I'm like, well, that's between y'all, or, it's whatever. And I feel like that's a good characteristic you're supposed to have.
Yes. It sounds like you've got the personality for it. You're kind of a natural therapist.
Yeah, and so I was super excited when I guess she's your agent. She's awesome. When she reached out, I'm like, oh, okay. Like me and my tiny podcast. But I'm like, all right, let's do it. Like, and so you are officially my first guest.
Oh, good. Oh, fun. Okay.
I've been on a few others podcasts, but I'm mainly solo. Like, this is all me editing. I do make a joke that my dog, where is he? I joke to everyone that he's my chief editor. So it's kind of a running joke in the podcast that's my chief editor.
I love it.
So it's me doing this. I've always been fascinated with like true crime and stuff. And some podcasts I listen to, I'm like, they would mention different disorders of different things, and I would be sitting there learning about it in class, and I'm like, oh, well, this is why, or this may be a cause, or blah blah blah. And I'm like, why doesn't anyone really have a podcast doing that? And I've kind of taken it to a different turn a little bit, but it's been an interesting journey. So,
well, there's a need for good information out there, and there's so much flawed information and so much speculation, and I'm with you about the fascinating aspect of psychology. There's nothing more interesting than human behavior, and why we do the things we do, why our family members do the things they do, and why people in general, in groups in our country, why do we have the problems we have? How do we fix the problems? To me, there's no more important topic. And right. I've been fascinated with it since early childhood. I always loved detective stories as a little kid, starting at 6 or 7. And really being a clinician is very much like being a detective, because you're looking at superficial things and you're trying to go underneath that and figure out, okay, what's driving the behavior? What's really going on? And most of us are kind of mysteries to ourselves, at least some of the time. We don't know why we do the things we do, why we make some of the choices we make. And so I think it's a wonderful discipline for understanding ourselves, for our own personal growth, helping our friends. And then, there's no more fascinating career. It can be pretty stressful, but I would not do anything else. So I've been licensed since 1991. And most of that time I've worked in private practice, with a really wide variety of people with every imaginable problem. But I've also worked quite a few years in forensic multidisciplinary groups, where I was working with a population of people who had committed some kind of violent crime and were now trying to integrate back into the community. And so they had intensive therapy several times a week and intensive case management. And I worked with psychiatrists, psychologists, and then I did clinical work. So it's something I know a lot about. And even in the discipline of psychology or psychotherapy, most clinicians do not study forensics. And so it is kind of a specialty area when you work with criminals. And a lot of people find the idea really scary and they don't want to do that. To me, it's just been another fascinating aspect of human behavior, so I've learned a lot. I've enjoyed it. And then why I wrote this particular book, I'm a mom. My kids are adults now, but they were in high school when Columbine happened. And that, because it received so much media attention, that literally went on for months, it shook all of us to the core. Our sense of school being a safe place, essentially a safe place, was shaken. And then when Sandy Hook happened, my office was flooded with teachers who were shaken that now, even in elementary school, we may have to protect the lives of our students. And that's not why we became teachers. You know, we're not cops. And people were saying, have teachers get guns and all these things. And teachers are still, even this week, I'm getting messages from teachers who are just rattled and having trauma reactions. And so in 2019, when I started the book, there had been El Paso, Texas, Dayton, Ohio, and Gilroy, California. And those happened boom, 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 just within hours of each other. And I'm active on Facebook, and there was so much buzz on social media. People were so upset, but they were sharing myths over and over and over. And one of the myths is we don't know why this happens. Well, I know why it happens. You know, it's no big mystery to me why it happens. And so I sat down and wrote a Medium article and just took about 15 minutes and put some basic things down on Medium. And that got a lot of attention. And one of the editors from McFarland Books contacted me a few weeks later and sent me an email and said, would you consider writing a book for us on the topic? So then I spent the next couple years working on the book and putting, basically, it's a kind of voluminous, there's a lot of information in it, but I wanted to put everything that I can say that we know and understand about why people do these things. And since the book has come out, obviously the problem has not stopped. It's just, we're seeing it increasing in frequency every year. So my heart is really in it. I've worked with so many people who have been victims of crime, but I've worked with perpetrators of crime too. And so my heart is really looking toward prevention, because, you know, if we understood these things better, we could do a better job of prevention. And that's what I would really like to see.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm reading it for the second time. I'm like, because there's so much information, and I'm like halfway through the second time, and I'm like, oh, like
it is a lot. Yeah.
But it's like, because I've studied some of them, like, okay, I understand that, but I'm like, I couldn't imagine being like not knowing some of these things.
Yeah. The publisher said, we'd really like you to write a comprehensive book. And I'm like, comprehensive? Okay, I can do that. So I put a lot of developmental information and how we develop empathy and why some people don't develop empathy. And you know, there is a lot in there. And I think now maybe it would be good to do an abridged version, because I think a lot of people, it's overwhelming, the amount of information. But I also tell people, you know, you can skip around if there's a certain chapter that you're interested in. You don't have to read the whole thing. You can just go to that chapter.
Yeah, I've enjoyed reading it. Even sometimes I'm reading certain things, I'm like, where is she going with this? And then I'm like, okay. Like there was one part with like the forensic stuff where it was like talking about, I can't remember if it was like not everything is like a mental disorder. I'm like, well, that's true. And then I can't remember what else it was. It was like something else. And I'm like, where is she going? And then you start talking about the insanity. I'm like, okay. I'm like, I'm glad she went there, because I was like, it's in my head, like, okay, where's she going?
Yeah.
Because there's a big difference between legality and the DSM.
Exactly. Yeah. And people often know bits and pieces of this, you know, but they don't really know the whole story. So I try to take a lot of the bits and pieces and then try to tie it all together so that there's a cohesive picture, you know, of what the problem is.
Right. And I loved that. Like the last class, well, one of the last classes I took was forensic psychology. I'm like, okay. And it was like a lot of legal issues, and then eyewitnesses and memory and things like that. And I'm like, oh, I love this. And our professor was a lawyer. She's like, I'm a lawyer, but I'm not your lawyer. And I loved that class, because I'm like, we're getting more of a legal perspective.
Right.
But it's important to know, because I mean, right now there's so many court cases. I watch court TV pretty often, and I've heard, I know in one case, I can't remember which one it was, where at first, was it the Dubell case? Lori Dubell, something like that, where she was not competent, and everyone was like uproar. And I'm like, well, it doesn't mean that she's not going to have a trial. It's just now she doesn't understand the proceedings, and she's not in that state of mind. And we have to kind of get her where she understands. She's still going to be held accountable, but
Yes,
yeah, it's
yes.
just
Yeah, and people don't understand the different aspects of a mental health problem, whether we're talking about a personality disorder or we're
right.
talking about psychosis. And we often hear
Exactly.
those two words confused, psychopath or psychotic. And they're very, very
Different.
different things. And we, as a clinician, that's one of the first things when you sit down with a new person, you want to know, are they psychotic or are they more psychopathic? Because the way you deal with them in the criminal justice system is very, very different. And the way that you deal with those people clinically is very, very different. And it's true, if someone is psychotic and they are not in reality, their brain is not working, they're having delusions, hallucinations, they're not thinking the way the rest of us think. So they're perceiving reality in a completely distorted way. They can't understand what's happening in a trial, and they can't contribute to their own defense until they've had some medication and they're no longer psychotic.
Right. And one thing I try to do with the podcast is I try to kind of break the stigma, and I go into like the darker side, but also like the not so dark side. I know earlier on I did psychotic disorders, and um well, it's like psychotic break, and then I did an episode of Criminal Minds and why he had that episode. And then there was also a man that had schizophrenia. I can't remember where, on a bus, where he pretty much like killed and mutilated a dude. But then I talked about, well, this is the perception we usually get of schizophrenia. And I also like describe what delusions are, what hallucinations are, and that they're in a different reality.
Yep.
And then I also go on, well, there's also people that have been schizophrenic that have been successful. And I talked about, I'm horrible with names, the mathematician from like A Beautiful Mind, I can't remember his name. And also there was a famous football player, he played for the Packers for years. Last name Aldridge was his last name, and he was diagnosed after he was in football, and he talked about advocacy. Of course he's passed now, but I try to shine light on both, and then use my own story as well, because I've been diagnosed with major depressive disorder and generalized anxiety disorder. And the thing is, when you go to a clinician, they're there to help and not necessarily completely explain. And so taking classes, I'm like, okay, I understand so much more, and what could be a cause, what could not be. And it's like, it's a healing in my own journey too, because I can explain to people like, you can still be successful and have mental illness, and there are ways that you can kind of deal with it. And trying to break the stigma. And
good because I always use the analogy of inclement weather, right? Inclement weather can mean a really foggy day, some drizzle, or it might mean a light rain, it might mean a thunderstorm, it might mean a Category 5 hurricane, right? And we're all going to have times when we're somewhere on that continuum. And psychosis, being probably the Category 5 hurricane on the continuum there, a lot of people, if they get treatment, can live fully functional lives, even if they have schizophrenia, because we have better medications for schizophrenia now. There are more treatments being developed for schizophrenia, and it doesn't have to be, a sentence of you're going to suffer your whole life, or you're going to be crazy. Many people do very, very well. And most people with schizophrenia will never become violent. It's a very small percentage. And those are usually the people who become very paranoid. They develop paranoid delusions and hallucinations. And the real tragedy is, if they commit violence, it's usually because they're frightened and they feel threatened, and they're having a hallucination that this person they may harm, who's really not trying to harm them, but they're hallucinating that they're in danger somehow. And so they think they're doing a good thing, by
in
doing
their
something
mind.
violent in their mind. And to me, that's one of the greatest tragedies, because that could certainly be prevented if they had access to the right kind of treatment. But so often people develop these symptoms for schizophrenia in their late teens, early 20s, and the family does not recognize what's wrong. So they accuse them of being on drugs, they throw them out of the house, they become homeless. And that's just the downward trajectory, where when I think what you're doing is so important, because if other people understood these are the signs and symptoms, you really need to get this person that you love evaluated by a mental health professional. And maybe it's not psychosis, maybe it is something else. But if it's psychosis, you're literally saving their lives,
Right. And even in your book, I know you didn't put it in what psychological terms where there's positive and negative symptoms. And like positive is when it's actively showing, and the negative is when it's more how do you
kind
say?
of shut down. They withdraw.
Right. So it's like if their face is just kind of flat, that's kind of like a negative. In a sense, where active is more the hallucinations and delusions.
Exactly.
And those things can be hard to pick up on too, but it's like if we inform people, they can look for those things and get people help.
Yeah, I wish we were teaching this in high school, because because then people would not only be able to help their family members, they'd be able to help their friends, because 16, 17, 18 is when a lot of those negative symptoms start, and then the positive symptoms start a few years later. And it's just incredibly important. The sooner we catch these things, the more we can do with treatment. And it really is saving somebody's life to get care early.
Right. And that goes for a lot of different things. And, I've been very open on my podcast about my journey. And even before I started school, like the month I was starting school, I had like it was like a really tough situation. I was under a lot of stress, and I was hospitalized for having like suicidal ideations. And it had like it was like a long anxiety attack or panic attack. I don't know how you would want to describe it. And like I've been diagnosed prior when I was in the military, and I was in that transitional period. And it was like, that's where I really realized, okay, this is serious. Because for me, it's like, oh, well, this is normal for me to have depression and anxiety. And so I'm thinking in lens of, oh, this is normal. And then that's when I was like, okay, this needs to like stop. This is not normal even for me. And I got the help I needed, and it's been like an upward journey. And occasionally it's like, but it's been like getting the help I need and valuing myself, and even just the cognitive behavioral health practices that my psychologist, the tools he's given me, has been so helpful. And I've been in the VA, and it's been like pretty much upward. And for me, it was first I started off with one type of medication, it didn't work, and then I was put on a different one, and it's worked. So, and I've studied those, and I'm like, oh, so these are the properties in one, this is the properties in the other. So now I'm thinking biochemically, oh, is it this neurotransmitter, or is it this one? Or
what you've learned has enhanced your life and allowed you to make a good recovery. And anxiety and depression are incredibly common. I think it's probably right now it's the norm. There's a lot to be anxious about, and a lot that's very sad going on in the country. So we really want to see people have the resources. We need more mental health therapists. I think we're having a big shortage right now. Good.
And I feel like and I've met more and more people that have gotten into the field that because of their own issues. And I'm like, I always thought that, well, maybe you wouldn't want to go into the field if you have this, because then it might be hard to navigate. But I've found more and more people have like had their own struggles and are successful in the field. And I feel like it's so relatable, because you may have clients with the same disorder, and you can just be more relatable and understand it on that personal level. So I'm like, for me, that's like the biggest thing, like that I'm kind of excited about going into this next journey, is getting clients that have dealt with the same things, and I can be like, not like grandiose, like, oh, look at me, but like, I've been where you're at, and
Right.
there's a way out, and it's not the taking your life way. It's getting help and knowing that you're cared about from practitioners. And so, I mean,
Yeah. Yeah. I think when you've suffered, you do have more empathy for other
yeah,
people who suffered. You're going to be less apt to just give them a flippant solution, well, just go exercise more or whatever, for a person in a deep depression. I mean, we all advocate exercise, right? But
right,
if a person is in a very deep vegetative depression and having suicidal ideation, they need more than that.
right.
And people who have never experienced those things, I think they're too quick to give glib answers. I think everybody at some point in life is going to have some kind of mental health condition.
Yeah.
We're all going to grieve, and that can be incredibly difficult and painful.
Oh, yeah.
But there's just a lot of this, it's inevitable human stuff. So I'm just really glad that you were able to get the help that you needed, and you're going to share that with other people. It's
Right. And it's hard because, well, I did take some time off from school, not a lot. It was just like telling my professors, hey, I'm grieving. All but one of, I would say all but one was like very, like, take all the time you need. I had one that was like not that way. And I'm like, how are you a psych professor? And I had a friend that I've known since like kindergarten. We pretty much grew up together. We rode the bus together. And we even were kind of friends or acquaintances in high school. And he took his life earlier this year. And he left behind a young family, a wife, and I think 2 boys. And the mom, she just had her 3rd son, I believe.
Wow.
And so she was pregnant while he took his life. And for all of us, it's just hard because it's like, and everyone was just checking on me like, hey, we know you suffer from depression. How are you? I'm like, this has made me realize how valuable life really is, and how I feel like if I were to take that route, how much I would be missed. And so in a sense, it's I don't want to say it's healing, but it's taking that circumstance and being like, I've been there, and I've told people, because I've been where he was, I understand it on such a more deeper level. Like, people are like, well, why would he do this, and why would he take his life? And I'm like, it's not escaping life, it's escaping pain. And that's the biggest thing people don't understand. It's, you feel like you literally can't do anything else. And even though you are loved and people care about you, you're in such of a state of mind where it's so dark, and you literally feel like there's no way out.
Yeah.
And I've tried to explain that. I'm like, I have literally been where he's at. Like, people have no idea where, with like, I'm like, you guys, and I've been more honest. I'm like, you guys, these are some things that I've done, or some things that I planned. And I'm like, you have no idea, but I've been exactly where he's at, except not actually committing the act. And I'm like, I know where he's at, or I know where he was at. And it's such a dark and sad place, but it's like, I can understand and let other people know and be more aware of, it wasn't you. There's nothing that you didn't do or did do. And yes,
people
there are ways,
always
right. There
people
are ways
blame
to
themselves.
intervene, but
yeah.
Right.
And sometimes, people think, well, I just didn't love the person enough. And, love can't cure depression. It's
Right.
good. We want that kind of support, but it's not enough. There has to be some other kinds of things going on. And often medication is what really fixes what's gone wrong in the brain. I'm a big advocate for let's do anything that works.
Right.
If it's going to help, if it's going to save a life, let's do what's needed.
Yeah, for me personally, it was the start of really going uphill was getting on the right medication.
Yeah.
It wasn't the solve all, but there was the start of, okay, I'm taking this seriously. First medication didn't work. Let's go on this next one. And we had to up it a couple times, but it's from there, it's like, okay, I'm able to live normally for most of my week. You know, I
Yeah.
may have a episode maybe once a week, or now like once every other week or a couple weeks, but where it was like I was having an episode like 2 or 3 times a week, it's like you can't live like that. And
Yeah. And
you
really
know,
that once the brain starts to work again, then you can do the psychological piece, the
right.
cognitive behavioral piece. But when you're too down, too far down, you can't make those things work. So it's really the combination of medication and therapy that a person with major depression usually gets the most benefit from.
Yeah, and that's been like me. That's been my story. That's what I've told people. For me, it worked. And if people don't have a biological, I guess, cause, which we still don't know, we still can't really
Right.
detect, and medication may not work, or
Right.
it may be a different medication, or you
Right.
might just have to go with a different therapist. Like it
Yeah. Yeah. I'm a big believer in we just keep trying until we get
right,
it, you know?
right,
And for most people, if they try and they get help, and as you say, if the first therapist isn't helpful, try a different one, you know, but we try everything because the goal is, of course, to keep people alive, but then to see people have a good life, you know?
right. Yeah. And I think that is so important. And that's like been my goal, is to tell my story a bit and share the knowledge that I've gotten from education. And I want to be an advocate for people. Like,
Yes.
you know, for me it's I've had so many friends like pass away young or take their lives, and it's just like it's so hard, and it's like what can we do? And I'm kind of like where you're at with the mass killers, the mass shooters, like what can we do? And oh my gosh, like with mental health, it's just like I wish people would understand more, or like know the signs. And there's only so much you can do at a certain extent, but it's like there's still a way to intervene.
There's
But
a way to intervene,
right,
and we need more resources, and we need more
exactly.
resources in schools and HR departments, you know.
Hmm.
And we really need some changes with who can just go into a store on their 18th birthday and buy a semi-automatic weapon with large capacity magazines, you know, because there are people who make threats as teenagers, but then they turn 18 and all of a sudden they have no criminal record, right?
Right. Yep.
and
I'm familiar.
and now you just turned 18, you know, but even though you've had an arrest record as a juvenile, you don't as an adult.
Yeah.
And we see these massive loopholes in the system right now. And so I think if we want to see the shootings, particularly the mass killings, and certainly in schools and wherever, we want to see that change, we're going to have to hit it from a lot of different angles.
Yeah.
And we can, you know, because we know what those angles are, but we have to get people on the same page and be willing to do that. Because mental health counseling in schools to support kids, to identify kids who are going down the wrong path, who maybe have a personality problem, maybe they're showing psychopathic traits, right?
Hmm.
But you want to catch that early and then direct them into, you know, programs that are going to help
Right.
downplay those tendencies rather than ignoring it and leaving them alone all day on the internet, where they're involved in, you know, racist websites
Hmm.
or mass shooter websites where
Right.
people are talking about their kill scores. You know, if we catch these things early, we can redirect people a lot. But then we also want to work with law enforcement. We want to work with probation officers, and we certainly need to figure out how do we red flag people who just should not have weapons because of
Yeah.
this behavior that's happened.
Yeah, and I agree. Like I will say it, I am very pro T like 2A. I'm very pro Second Amendment, pro guns. I don't know how many weapons we have, because my husband, he likes to collect. Like for him, that's a hobby, but we're safe. We don't have criminal records. Like, and in our state to conceal carry, well, to purchase a weapon, one, you have to have either conceal carry or a purchase license or permit in the state of Nebraska. And if you do the concealed carry, you have to do like a 2-day or an 8-hour course where it's like goes over training, laws,
Good.
anything you can think of.
Yeah.
And then you go to the shooting range because you don't want to be shooting willy-nilly. They
Right.
make sure you shoot on target, make sure you know the mechanisms of the weapon, how to unload, load, if it jams, what do you do? You will get disqualified if you're unsafe.
Mhm.
Obviously, you don't just point it at anything, anyone. That's also a
Mhm.
rule in the military we learn.
Yeah.
And then you have to go through, it's either and I think it's state patrol. I keep getting it mixed up. I don't have my wallet on me to pull it out. But you go through there once you pass the training, and then you get fingerprinted. They do background check, all of
Mhm.
that, and then if you're qualified, they send you in the mail your little concealed carry. And whenever you purchase a weapon, you either show that or you show the purchase permit, which I don't know what all goes into the purchase permit. I'm sure it's similar because we aren't open carry state except for in Omaha and Lincoln. And at the time, my husband and I lived in Omaha. So we're like, well, we can't open carry and we would rather conceal carry anyway, because if you open carry, you're kind of putting a target on your back in a sense.
I would think, yeah.
Right. And so we are very pro 2A, but I understand all of the like all the mechanisms in our state that we have to go through. And I'm like, well, it's a lot of people say, you know, you're not supposed to infringe on right to bear arms, but you still have the right to bear arms. You just have to go through certain checks and balances. And
Just
for
makes
me,
sense. Yeah.
right, for
Just
me,
makes sense.
for me, I'm very pro 2A, and I'm like, well, it says shall not be infringed, but that's just saying that you can't acquire weapons, but it doesn't say anything against the legality of the process.
Right.
And so I
Right.
might get hated for that or loved for that, but and an issue I've had the last couple of days, I've gone in so many debates of people that don't know what weapons are, or they'll say assault rifle or assault weapon. I'm
Right.
like, well, what is that? And they'll be like, oh, the AR. I'm like, actually, that's not what AR stands for. It's a company in the 1950s that created it, and assault rifle is an automatic weapon.
Right.
If you look at I'm like, those are already banned. So what are you saying? Like, make your case, educate yourself. And then they get mad. They're like, oh, you're just trying to do one thing. I'm like, well, it's not just one thing. Like it's not
Right.
just the guns. It's a very complex issue.
It is.
We tend to focus on one thing. Some people, they only focus on the mental health.
Right.
Others, they focus on, they want all guns taken away, or they want more background checks or whatever. It's like, it's a complex issue.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
also have people that, I remember reading in your book, I remember reading some of these things as well. They show signs, like they'll put stuff on Facebook. It's like,
Yeah. Yeah.
why are they not? Or in some cases, the authorities are contacted and they're like, oh, there's nothing we can really do. It's like,
right. Yeah, we've got to sharpen up in a lot of ways if we want to see this change. Now, if we don't want to see it change, I would predict it's going to get worse and worse and worse. And we will have more shootings like what just happened in Texas, and like what happened in Sandy Hook, and what happened in Columbine, and what's happening in movie theaters and grocery stores and at synagogues and mosques. We will have more of it. Or we can say we're going to make a lot of changes, you know, simultaneously. I have a friend, I don't remember what state he's in, somewhere in the Midwest, I believe. And said in their community, you have to jump through a lot of hoops to get a gun. And then you have to go meet with the police chief for an interview in the town. And it's really up to that person to do the final stamp of approval. And I sort of liked that idea, you know, that somebody sits down and asks you questions. Because I think if a lot of these guys were sat down with the police chief who was asking them really personal questions about what they're going to use the gun for, some might be able to fool him, but I think a few he would go, I'm not feeling good about this.
Yes, you know? Meter will come up.
Yeah.
And it's like, for me, it's like, I'm not trying to argue with people, but I'm also like trying to educate. I'm like, well, you say you want all assault rifles taken away, but they're already banned. So what point are you making? And it's like, for me, it's like, it's not just one thing. There's not one thing. There's so many intricacies into this issue. And
Yeah.
It's like some people are so narrow-minded where they're focused on one thing. I'm like, if we were to say take away all guns, well, then what will happen? You're still gonna have people that find a way, that black market, and we're still gonna have the same issue. So it's like there's so many different things that we can do than focus on just one thing that
Yeah, we
will
need to
help.
do many things. And then we need to find ways, as you say, to educate each other because we've all got different areas of knowledge. And then we're probably going to have to find ways to compromise when there are
Right.
vast differences of opinion.
Yeah.
But I do think we're going to see increasing, it's not moving in the right direction, it's moving in the wrong direction and getting deadlier and deadlier. And it just devastates people. You know, I think the general panic that people are feeling right now, because it really is grocery stores, movie theaters, Walmart, the mall, your kids at school in their first grade class. It's like, where are we safe? You know? And that's a terrible way to live in a country that's supposedly as advanced as the United States.
Right.
It feels like we're a very backwards place at this point.
Yeah, it's like when I go out, if I'm with my husband, like one of us is usually carrying because I'm like, you never know what's gonna happen. You never know who you're gonna go across. Like it's such like a scary place. Like how are you supposed to defend yourself? And or if you're like in a store and then someone just starts shooting, it's like if you're the only if you're the only person carrying, then you're kind of taking that responsibility. But then again, you're like trying to protect yourself and your
well,
own
and this is kind of what we're seeing. The more social chaos we have, the more frightened people become. The more frightened people become, the more guns people have. I just heard that there are now over 400 million guns in civilian hands in the United States. There's only 320 million people. So and then when you get the crossfire, like in the shooting in Tucson when Gabby Giffords was shot, when the crowd in the audience when she was shot tackled the gunman, but someone picked up the gun, and then when the police arrived, they thought he was the gunman and almost killed him. So it's a very complicated situation.
Yeah, and then you need to know police procedure and
we're a big messy country.
Yes,
and we've
so
got
many things.
Lots and lots of different value systems, and we're not one culture, we're a land of many cultures. People don't see the reality in the same way, they don't see the world in the same way, and I think the sad thing right now is people are frightened and they're just throwing up their hands and they want a solution, and there's not going to be one thing that fixes it. We're going to have to do a lot of things, and that's why we're having this discussion, because we've got to talk about it and problem solve and figure out, okay, what are we going to tell our politicians we want them to do?
Exactly.
Like, they don't know what to do.
No, they don't. Like I'm like, ugh. Like even some that politically aligned, I guess more politically aligned with me, some things that they do or say, I'm like, we're not fixing the issue. Like but you see this all the time. Like if I use this all the time, like my husband, he's a legal immigrant from Guatemala. He's a citizen now. And we always talk about immigration, legal, illegal, all of that. And it's like, well, one side, it's like, okay, build the wall. That's only going to do so much. And then the other side's like, let everybody come in. And if they're illegal, you can give them everything. But it's like, the issue is policy when it comes to that. And where nothing is actually being nothing is actually being changed. It's just words, or here's a solution, and it's just like a band-aid. And I'm like,
it's not really a solution, and we end up with complete polarization instead of people really being able to talk and try to problem solve. And that's going to be the end of us if we don't come together and try to figure out how do we problem solve here. And if there were one easy solution, if it was as simple as, violent video games cause mass shootings, well, That's easy, but we know that that's not true. Otherwise, there
Right,
would be mass shootings all over South Korea and Japan and Germany and every other country, because people are playing the same video games all over the
right.
world. So it's very complicated, and I wish there was just one thing we could do. I wish,
I know,
but
me too.
yeah,
If it was me, I would just be hitting everyone with like fake guitars because I was like beast at Guitar Hero.
that would be great. Yeah,
I'm still lame. I have my PS2 and a Wii. And I'm like, oh, that's old school now. I
yeah,
don't
that's
play
true.
games as
Yeah.
much.
Yeah, my son just got a PS5, I guess. I
I'm
just
like,
found that out
I'm
yesterday.
like,
Yeah, but
I'm
he's
old school.
37 or something now. So, yeah.
Well, there is a one story I kind of wanted to tell you about. I want to pull it up. I tried reaching out to her and she didn't reply, which is kind of sad. But this actually happened in my school, my high school, happened years ago. I'm gonna have to find. I wanted to talk to her and get an interview when I was actually in town, but I guess with things, it's just been crazy, and I was only there for a short amount of time. Let me try to find it. Um, she is a guidance counselor at my old high school, and let me see. I gotta find it. She intervened with a kid who brought a gun to school, who was threatening to shoot up the school, and she intervened. I don't know the full story. I remember hearing about it a lot when it happened, and then she wrote a book about it. Let me see. I'm gonna have to Google. Okay, so the book is called Saving Sycamore, the school shooting that never happened.
Oh, that sounds like a wonderful book.
Yeah, and so this happened at my high school where I graduated from, and the guidance counselor is Molly Hudgens or Hudgens. So I make sure I pronounce it right. Incredible lady. She was there when I was there. And so she pretty much single-handedly stopped this from happening. And it was at Sycamore Middle School where this happened. And so she wrote a book about it. And I'm going to, this was in 2016, September 20th, 2016. Yeah, that's when this happened. I'm just kind of briefly reading what happened. So I'm trying to read. Okay, so the students, they remain unidentified even to this day. They were armed with a semi-automatic handgun and an additional magazine of ammunition and planned to kill teachers and police. So she didn't know the extent of what was happening at the time. And the student walked into her office and she knew something was off with the student. And she describes it like getting a lightheaded sensation. And she just remembers thinking like, don't faint. And then she thought he has a gun, and all of a sudden 18 years kind of flashed behind her eyes. I'm kind of reading quotes from like the news. After 90 minutes of talking and praying with the young student, he gave up the weapon, and they put their arms around each other and hugged. And so no shots were fired, no one was hurt, and it was because he reached out for help first, which we know isn't always the case.
Right.
But it is a very interesting story, and that's, I guess, her whole story of behind her book. And she got a Congressional Medal of Honor.
Wow.
And she met with like the 8th graders and told them they were going to protect him, like I guess the students. And I guess 4 years later, he's safe and sound with family. He's been given a second chance because nobody knows who he is. It's kind of crazy that I remember hearing this happen. I'm like, oh, like I saw it on the news, and I was only a couple years into my military career, and I'm like, oh, that's my guidance counselor. I saw it on the news. I'm like, it was national, and I'm like,
It's a wonderful story.
I'm like, how is my tiny little school
Yeah, yeah. A lot of small schools are where these things happen. Probably statistically, you'll see more in smaller, more suburban or rural areas than in large city schools. But I think that shows an important point, that, and it certainly, as you said, doesn't work in all cases,
Right.
but having that heart to heart connection is really powerful. And sometimes you're dealing with a young person who's just really isolated. And in that isolation, they've gone into very dark, scary worlds online. And those
Yeah.
are the places where they spend all their time. And they really don't have a deep heart to heart connection with anyone. They've alienated their parents, or there's a lot wrong. And that's certainly not everybody.
Right.
But I think there are probably hundreds of stories like this teacher's story, and
Yeah.
maybe where the counselor doesn't even know that the
Hmm.
person had been planning a killing. But
Right.
because somebody makes that kind of heart connection, it offers a bit of hope and a different way of looking at things. And somebody that was thinking of going down the path to violence chooses another path.
Right.
And even for the people who say, well, I don't feel like there's anything I can do, we can all go into the world with that attitude of, I'm going to be making those kind of quality connections when
Right.
I meet people. And if everybody went out in the world with that attitude, I do think a lot of good would come out of it, even if we never know the people whose lives we touch.
Right.
And that's
And
something
there's,
we're all capable of doing.
yeah. And it's just crazy because I've always been that kind of person that has always reached out or has always tried to be very positive, or like um when I'll give you another story. And a lot of people that know me and knew me in high school now know about this, but I've never really talked about it on my podcast, so this will be interesting. When I was a junior in high school, there was so much going on. We had multiple students pass away, or like in our town, in our county. One of my best friends, we used to always go to the skating rink. All of us would go, and he was from a different school. He was a year older, and he actually, we met, we clicked, we were like best friends. And I noticed one day he was like really down at the skating rink. I'm like, what's going on? And he's like, well, my home life isn't great. And I'm like, what? I'm always here for you, kind of thing. And um, then he came out to me. He was gay. And I was like, okay, well, I'm still your friend. Like, I guess he thought that people were going to, I'm like, well, I'm still your friend. I love you for who you are. Everything else, it's whatever. To me, it's nothing. You're my friend. And the skating rink actually like closed down. Very sad. There were a lot of fights and some things that
Mm.
teenagers do. People would smoke, or they would sneak.
Mm.
They'd be smoking outside with different things, and
Yeah.
um, his home life got worse. And of course, the whole skating rink thing, that was kind of like middle school. Like middle school, I knew him like seventh, eighth grade. And then when I was a junior, he was a senior and he committed suicide. And at
Mm.
that point, we lost touch. We weren't really friends anymore because the skating rink closed down. No one really hung out there anymore. And I still have the news article in like one of my safes. And when I heard his name, I was like, that name is so familiar. And then I saw his face on the news. I'm like, oh, no way. And oh my gosh. And he was bullied, and he had a hard home life. And so that was one incident. Then we had a mentally challenged kid get into a car accident and pass away. His nickname was Keys because he loved keys. And so we all donated keys to be put on his casket when he was buried. And there was just a lot of change in our school at the time. We had a wonderful principal, and then he retired, and then we had a horrible principal come in, and it was not good. And so I started this thing called Anonymous, and At first, people were like, "What is this? This is kind of creepy." And I had teachers help me, and I had a friend help me, and we would kind of be on a secret mission. We would observe people in the hallway and see where their locker was and what hall, and we would write their name. And we would just we observed for a couple weeks, got a lot of information, and then I would type notes from Anon, and my mom would print them out. And then I had a school and after school club, and then in between periods, I would try to leave early, go on a bathroom break, and I would post them on their lockers. And people didn't know it was me. Some people suspected, but I didn't actually like tell people until like years later when I was in the military, because my people joked like maybe high school reunion she'll like whoever it is, and but I made a post about it, and it was just something I did because we had such a tough year and so much
I
going
love
on.
that. Yeah, look at what you did,
I had teachers
to
in
make
on it
that
too.
connection.
I
Yeah.
was like, hey, I would have one teacher, I'm like, hey, I need to talk to you. They're like, what's going on? I'm like, well, it's kind of a secret, but you've seen things on, you know, on people's lockers. That's me. Can you help me out? And like in between periods or after school, I can give you the information. Like I can give you the locker number and what hall, and you just put them on there. And there would be like, sometimes there would be in between class periods where a teacher would not particularly have students in their class, and they would go put them out. People were like, how did they get there? Because there was nothing before here. Or I would go on a bathroom break and put one or two here or there.
Yeah.
And so it was very sneaky and very fun. And it did, I kind of had a Facebook page too. And yeah, it was
That's
really
wonderful.
It was fun, but it was also like, it lifted people's spirits because we were in such a tough time. And I'm like,
Yeah.
if I can help one person
Yeah.
or save one person, and I have to try to pull up one person, like one of the very first people were like, this is kind of creepy. And then other people got them. They're like, oh, okay, it's a positive thing.
That's a good thing.
I'm
I think that's the way to go into the world. What can I do to lift people up? Yeah, it makes a difference. It really does.
Yeah, and I had a friend help me out, and yeah, in 2017, like 5 years ago, well, it was 5 years ago at that point. That's when I made the post of it was me. And like some people are like, hey, are you gonna be there this year or what? And it was like, because I think I only did it our junior year because I try to make people think it was a senior, and things gotten better at that point. And so some people were like, oh, I never had a locker. And so then I would like on my Facebook thing, it'd be like Anon at SHS. And I would give them a little note. And so yeah, some of these people, they have pictures of their notes on here. It's kind of fun to look back. I would post inspirational quotes. One thing I put was like, don't ask why, just go with it.
I think you are meant to be a therapist.
I'm excited for it, but I just remember coming to my mom like, hey, I need your help. And she's like, okay, what's going on? I'm like, there's just been so much, and this is the only way. And one thing that did inspire me was one of my friends, on her locker, she had a prayer request thing. She's like, just you could write if you wanted a prayer request. And I was like, that's kind of a good idea, but not everyone's going to be into that. So how can we reach more people? And
yep.
Yeah, I have people, they would post it. They said, this made my day. Like one of them said, you're very pretty and have an amazing sense of humor. Some said, you're gorgeous, you're very talented, funny, and athletic. Just different things like, you're very friendly. I love how you're very caring and just yourself. It wouldn't just be a bland like,
yeah,
hey, you're amazing. It was very personable because I knew a lot of these people. And then sometimes some people would reach out to the Facebook page and say, hey, so-and-so has had a really rough time. And, they could probably use a note. And I'd be like, okay, do you know their locker number? And I'll be like, all right. But I wouldn't tell them when, because I didn't want people like, because people would scout out like in between periods, like, oh, are they going to post? So I'd have to be very sneaky. I'd mainly do it after school.
Yeah.
Or in between, or once it got kind of everyone knew about it, I'd have teachers help because at that point everyone was looking out for who's posting. So I'd have teachers like, while people were in class, just I had my little minions.
No, that's really inspirational, and that would be the kind of story to write up and get that out in the world, because I would love to see that at every school, you know?
Yeah.
That would make a difference for people. A lot of people are isolated and don't have friends, and you know, it's very easy to get into depression, and when people get into depression, they can start thinking very dark thoughts.
Right.
So I think that
and
would
I've
be
been there,
wonderful.
so I definitely know. And
something like that would have changed my life in high school. I was a depressed kid in high school, so I would have loved something like that.
I was too, but I was always trying to just reach others as well. Like, you know, it's in that year, it was just tough. We had so many people pass. I think even on the page, I posted things of so and so, we're gonna miss you because someone passed. Like, it was just, there's so much, and I'm like, okay, we need to just, we're all suffering, and how else are we going to survive?
Yeah, we do need human bonds. We really do. We need, I mean, it may sound corny, we need love, but we need connection, you know?
Right.
We need connection with other people who care. That's a basic human need.
Yeah, it totally is. So I guess lastly, I don't know how long you want to talk, but I don't want to keep you too long. So your book, just so everyone knows to go get it, it's called The Minds of Mass Killers, Understanding and Interrupting the Pathway to Violence.
Yeah, that last part.
Mrs. Lovely Dr. P. Shavaun Scott. So you go by Shavaun, right?
I do.
I was like, what's the P for? But I'm not gonna ask.
Yeah.
Truly inspirational woman. When I read like up about you and saw videos, I'm like, this lady reached out to me.
You know, like, it's a message that I will take this message everywhere forever, because I think the main part of that title is understanding and interrupting. Yeah. You know, and if one person in Nebraska learns some things that are red flags that we can watch out for, and learns, you know, see something, say something, and learns that heart-to-heart connections can make a difference, as your school counselor did, you know, reaching out to somebody when you're seeing signs, talking to a parent, you know, about talking to a teacher at school when they're seeing, you know, somebody bring a gun to school. Even one little action anywhere in the world, if that saves a life or lives, hey, it's certainly worth my time. I'm happy to talk anytime. Right.
What do you think, because I've read your book and I want other people to go get it and read it. You have so much great information in here. I guess what would be the biggest points to take away from your book?
Biggest points to take away, I think, are it's a pathway. Nobody ever just snaps. They usually think about it for weeks, months, or even years. Sometimes for a decade, they think about it before they do it. And the sooner on the pathway we can intervene, the better. You know, and that's where I think having more mental health counselors in school, making those positive connections with counselors, you know, that stops it early on. But if it hasn't been stopped early on, and you see someone posting on social media, Instagram, Facebook, holding their AR-15 and saying, I'm the next school shooter, which some of these guys have,
right? Yep.
You know,
Parkland.
You call the FBI, you call, you know, I say call the FBI, 1-800-CALL FBI. You call your local police. If you know family members, you call the family members, because sometimes thousands of calls come into the FBI every day, and some of them are going to slip through the cracks.
Right.
And so I just go back to catch it early if you can. If you can't, if you see somebody who may be going to act, see something, say something. because we do stop a lot of them right at the very end. They're in the news today, where somebody had bought the weapons, they had bought all the ammo, somebody knew about it, because most of the time there are other people who knew, even if
Mm-hmm.
they thought, well, we thought he was just joking, or we
Right.
thought he'd do it someday, but not today. Take it seriously, because we will save lives by taking it seriously.
It's very true. Very true. Even my graduating year, we had someone in our class threatened, and it was taken seriously.
Yeah.
They didn't say anything about the news, but we all knew about it, and someone reported it. And a lot of us were like, well, we're going to say something if no one else does. And luckily, by the end of the day, someone already reported them, and they were expelled. And but we were still worried, because we're like, well, they still made the threat, and graduation hasn't came.
Yeah.
So, but I guess the intervention, and they probably got him help.
Exactly.
So, I mean,
exactly. And I think some people, it's really common for a person to make these kind of threats, but then to say, well, I don't mean it, I'm just joking. And we'd like to believe that they don't mean
right.
it, but that's not always true. And that's just something that they say, so we always assume people mean it. And another red flag is if they're killing animals, or
Yep.
posting dead animals. It's odd, but that does go with it. It's one of the clusters in behavior that we see. So I think if you see a kid who's really into death in a really morbid way, unlike other kids, and if they're killing animals, these are the kinds of things we need to get that person some attention before it progresses into hurting people.
Yeah, it's definitely like puzzle pieces.
Yeah.
Definitely, because even when I was younger, I'm like, oh, serial killers. Like I was into,
Yeah.
but there is that extra step of, they used to call it like a triad, like if it was like, if you're a bedwetter, if you kill animals, and another thing or whatever, home life,
right,
the FBI or
yeah,
behavioral analysts had. And it's still kind of relevant, but they've kind of swayed away a little bit, but
the bedwetting, we've kind of diminished that in its importance, because a lot of kids, they just have a small bladder and they grow out of it,
right.
But I think hurting animals is one that's still very relevant, that shows up in the literature a lot. And what we see with the recent shooters, that's what other kids say, that they were really into hurting animals.
Right.
And that's just a bad sign, because that's not normal kid behavior. You don't attack dogs and cats. That's just not typically what kids do. So always see something, say something, and just as you have done, go out and make those good heart connections with people, because you never know, you're saving someone from homicide or suicide, or just addiction. We could make the world a kinder place.
Oh yeah.
And I think that's something, none of us are powerless when it comes to that.
Right.
Be wise.
Right. And one of my classes, social psychology, shout out to one of the best professors. I'm not gonna say her name, but I don't even know if they listen. But we had a lot of really cool experiments in that class. Like we had one day where you would just observe people and their behavior, and you'd take notes. And then another one was you had to do something kind of deviant from behavior, like not like intentionally harmful or things that would break the law, but like for me, what I did when I was in the gym, it was so embarrassing, but while I was running, I just started singing like really loudly to like my music, just to see, because you had to do something to get people, and it's like something embarrassing, and you have to describe how you felt, how others reacted. And
oh, that's a great experiment.
Right. But one of my favorites was you had to commit a day of compassion, is what she called it. And me, because I don't have school on campus, all mine was online. I was like, well, I'll commit 2 days, because one, my husband, he was back home in Guatemala. He had some family issues, family health stuff. And so I'm like, well, I can't really be positive to him if he's not here, and I don't go out as much, so I'll commit 2 days, and while I'm out, I'll and I'm like, this feels really good. Like for me, I'm always trying to be that way, but it gives you that extra think of.
That's what a great teacher. I applaud that.
Like it's
teacher.
really something that we need to do. And
yes.
And it's crazy because like I did the whole pay it forward thing at the line. I kind of started it at Scooters, which is like I don't know if you know what Scooters is. It's a coffee place, and I guess now they're expanding more because I had family in Illinois said, oh, they're starting to pop up here. I'm like, oh, they've been here in Nebraska for like since I've been here, which has been like 8 years. So I'm like, they've been here, so I guess they're starting to kind of spread their wings. But then the other day, my husband and I, we were at Scooters in the drive-thru, and someone paid for ours, and I'm like, we're like, what? Like,
How
and
nice.
then I remember doing that when I started that on my day of compassion. I'm like, it's so crazy because on our day of compassion, I started that, and it's good. It's crazy how good it feels. And some people are like, oh, it's the pay it forward thing is so cliche, and it's just social facilitation. I'm like, well, whether it is or not, like the next person in line, they may not know it's a chain. They may think that they're the first one. And,
Right.
I try to do that if I see someone in distress, or if I see like a police officer getting food or fellow military, I'm like, hey, we're brothers, sisters in arms. Like, even though I'm like a veteran now,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, it makes a difference in the world, and sometimes just one kind comment and a smile absolutely changes a person's day. And we don't know, you never know how
right.
the impact of that plays out. But I do know we would have a kinder country if even half of us went out in the day in the world and had the
Yeah.
compassionate when we interact, at the stop sign where, everybody's trying to go at the same time. If we just had an attitude of kindness, I think that
Right.
that would make me happy. That would be a wonderful thing, even if half of us could do that.
Yeah, maybe a new experiment is like to stand at the corner, kind of like typically homeless people would, but have like a sign that says like free hugs, and see if people
Yeah.
would actually.
Oh,
I
they
don't know.
will.
I
Yeah, they
just thought of
will.
that. So
Yeah.
maybe I'll do that. They'll keep you updated.
Yeah. Kindness, compassion, and then wisdom. We do whatever is necessary. If we can catch the pathway to violence early, the best. But if it's
Right.
already progressed down, then we act wisely and we get help. So
Yeah.
save lives, community safety above all.
Yeah. And it's like whenever I was in the military, I was trained by, well, now they're called like Green Dot. It's like a sexual what are they called? Sexual assault prevention type program. I don't think the military does it anymore, but at the time we did. And one of the takeaways was that even if one person does something, like it's kind of like a ripple effect. Like if one person does it, it has so much impact, was kind of like the message. And it was like intervention strategies of like sexual assault before it happens. And I'm like, that's such a good message, because
Yes.
even in the military, we were told you can't make these comments, or we have more women in the workforce, so you can't say, and this is what sexual assault is. But it went more into not exactly what is consent. It did a little bit. And I feel like the military is way ahead of civilian when it comes to like drinking and drugs and sex. Like they're very much like, if they're obliterated, they can't consent. Whereas civilian, they're like having debates where like, we already have this figured out. What are y'all doing? But even though it still happens, but one thing was the intervention and the proactive strategies. Like proactive is having a rally or something, or having a 5K for sexual assault awareness. And even prevention, like there are different strategies for prevention. There's like direct, and then there's delegation, and I'm like, oh, this is such a good, and it can be used in other ways as well. If you don't feel like being direct and intervening, you can delegate to like, hey,
Totally.
or you get a group, like, or you call the cops. Like there was so much, or there's distraction, which is my favorite. You can get kind of creative with that. But with sexual assault, it's kind of easy. Oh, you go up to the girl who you're suspected of, if you're at a bar, and be like, oh, hey, so hey, don't you remember me? And
Right.
It's kind of, or you go up to the guy, you're like, hey, I think your car is getting towed. And then they leave the
They
situation.
leave. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Really good strategies. And again, prevention is everything.
right.
Yep.
And being proactive. I feel like even though that's a different situation, it can be applied like
Same thing
in
for
this.
everything.
Yeah.
For everything.
And I feel like the more, like you said, the more compassionate we are and the more kind, and it's just one thing. Anytime I go out, even if I'm like having not a good day, I try to smile at people and I try to like wave, and then they're like, I don't know you.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's okay. I try.
Yeah.
But we all, even if you're a little uncomfortable, just you, and that was like my whole thing with the anonymous thing, was I was like afraid of people are gonna think this is weird, or what if they find out it's me or whatever. And
I love it. It's beautiful. I'm so glad you did that. Yay.
and
Yay,
as a high schooler, I'm like, we're just having so much crap going on. Why don't we just I even try to get our resource officer, but he's like, well, my role is a little different. I can't really, he's like, I was gonna try to get him to like do some observation or see if he could. At first, when the idea was ruminating, I was like, well, maybe if we open the locker and put a note. He's like, well, I can't really open people's lockers. I'm like, okay, so maybe I'll just stick them on the outside. And
I love it.
So, I mean, like, I'm a teenager. How do I do this? And
I love it.
I was lucky to have help. My mom helped. I had a friend help at the time. Me and her were kind of like partners in crime.
Oh, nice.
We had different classes. She did a lot of observation. We'd have a notebook. We would just write first name, last name, the hall, and then the locker number. And if we didn't know the person, we would try to observe their behavior or things that we kind of knew about them from the grapevine. Oh, they're very athletic, or they're always like friendly, or they're always cracking jokes. So just little things that we can make that note personal.
Yeah.
So
I love it.
I feel like if we could find a modern way to do that, and even if we don't have lockers, like, how do we
truly
change?
That's my brightest story I think I'm going to hear today. So
I'm glad.
A smile there. That's a beautiful story.
Yeah, I'm afraid though that if I do the free hugs thing on a corner, people are like, oh, pretty girl on a corner. Like,
somebody might take that wrong. Yeah.
So I'm like, I'll find another way to do something, but maybe not to that extent. But oh man, it's been amazing having you. I've enjoyed the discussion. I hope you've
it's been delightful. Wonderful to meet you and talk. Thank you.
Yeah, well, we will have to do this again. I just enjoyed
I would love to. Yeah.
And go more in depth about this.
I did love to talk about it.
I did think about covering some of these cases, and maybe we can go back more into it. Layers
of things to explore, and the personality types and traits that get going, and I would love to come back. So just send me a note. We'll make it happen.
Yeah, we'll definitely have to. I've loved this so much. You're amazing. You're an inspiration to me.
Likewise. I'm
excited for my future and helping and impacting others. I always tell people my message for the podcast is advocacy, and it's for people to understand the mental health and mental illness a little bit more, and that it's not just this dark, creepy, stigmatized thing. Like, a lot of us have it, and giving data, giving symptoms, and I don't know if you've listened to any of the episodes. It's been a little bit since I've done an episode, but I'm getting back into it now that I've graduated. That was a big thing of my finals, and there's no way, just so busy. But
it's important work. And eliminating the stigma is incredible. I mean, that's what we all need to be doing, because like inclement weather, everybody's going to have some dark times. You know, it may not be the Category 5 hurricane, but we're all going to have a thunderstorm here and there.
It may not be the Katie, but it'll be the rain.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much. We'll have to do this again. We're gonna have to for sure. I'm planning on doing a few more episodes, maybe about this subject, and dissect some of the things that you have in your book, I'll make sure to shout you out in those, and then maybe have you come back and discuss some of those.
I would be happy to.
It's been a pleasure having you.
All right. Thank you so much, Katie.
All right. Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye. Well, thank you guys so much for listening. I'm your host, Katie Gonzalez, and you've been listening to What the Psychology.
Stay psych, y'all.